Welcome to the second hour, or the second section, I guess, of our discussion of MK Ultra, LSD, and Dr. John C. Lilly, programming and meta-programming in the human biocomputer. Now, this book by Lilly is, as I said, unbelievably difficult to read. Half the time, I cannot make sense of what he's talking about. So what we're going to do, I think, is, we are gonna look through this book, try to get into as much as we can make sense of it as possible. But I think as you'll see, as I read from it, you'll see what I'm saying about the difficulties. So what we also want to talk about is kind of the context, which we covered in some of the other conversations that I did, particularly on John Marx's book, The CIA and the Search for the Manchurian Candidate. So you can go read that book, or listen to my talk on it in the archives. And that is similar to the content of Walter Bowert's book, Operation Mind Control, that I mentioned in the first section. And Bowert's book is a little dated, but it's still good. It's good as a kind of introduction. It was written in 1978. I believe that's around the same time as John Marx's book. Marx's book might be a little bit earlier. And they have some of the same material, but Bowert mentions, for example, that the rise of LSD was in concert with tests related to hypnosis in the military, searching for truth drugs and truth serums and so forth. And he mentions Albert Hofmann discovering this, and of course Sandoz Pharmaceuticals, which had been manufacturing LSD since 1938. So this backs up the view that, yes, there does seem to be an earlier Tavistock Institute, Aldous Huxley connection to all this stuff. And we all know that Huxley was doing LSD, certainly prior to the 50s. And as we're starting to learn, as we'll talk about in Potash's book, a lot of Hollywood people were doing LSD in the 40s and 50s if they had certain contacts. A lot of the elites, intelligentsia, as well in the 50s were experimenting with LSD. And the reason we bring up Bowert's book is just the early dates here, and the fact that Hoffman, even in his first trip, said it was a bad trip, and yet they still continued to dose all these people and put this drug out there. And we read that in 1950, LSD was introduced to American psychiatrists, and interest rapidly spread to the scientific community. So this is where we're going to get into the period of John C. Lilly into the 60s and 70s. Where what you see is that this still goes on. This doesn't stop. It doesn't go away. That just because the 60s counterculture revolution dies out by the 70s, the LSD experimentation and mind control, it doesn't go away. The fact that there's some House Un-American Activities Committee hearing on mind control and MK Ultra doesn't mean this stuff goes away. It just morphs into other named programs. It goes into biowarfare, etc., chemical warfare. In fact, Bowert says on page 77 that in 1953, the CIA had made plans to purchase 10 kilograms of LSD for use in drug experiments with animals and human beings. Since there are more than 10,000 doses in a gram, that meant that the CIA wanted 100 million doses. The CIA obviously wanted to corner the market on LSD so that other countries would not be ahead of the U.S. in their potential for LSD warfare. That year, Sandoz Laboratories and Pharmaceuticals filled many orders for LSD from both the CIA and the Defense Department. According to Hoffman, they continued to do so up until the mid-60s. The Army would also visit the labs every 2 or 3 years and check out the progress. Dr. Hoffman said that he had never been told the reason for the Army's interest in the drugs. As an employee of the pharmaceutical house, Dr. Hoffman was in no position to warn the Army researchers away from the drug, despite his belief that it would be extremely dangerous if used improperly, and despite his potential distaste for their work. And then we enter the period of the character Tim Leary, and Leary is at Harvard, and in the 60s, this is interesting, Leary had conducted experiments at prisons, Concord Correctional Facility in Massachusetts, under the cover of a private foundation through Harvard University. Later on, it came to be known that Leary received National Institutes for Mental Health grants through the 50s up to 58, wherein Leary dosed prison inmates, college students, and mental health people. And then he goes on, Leary that is, goes on to talk about the abilities to use this like a shaman and to kind of be a handler for somebody if you knew the techniques to, quote, guide them. And so he talks about a new professional class of people that he thought would be developed, psychedelic spirit guides, to supervise people through these trips. Now, what did Leary do was, what he did was popularize all this on all these campuses, and guess how he did it? Quote, "It is your right to alter your consciousness." So this was sold under the bogus crap of individual rights. Right? Exactly what they did with abortion. It's all an individual. It's your right to do this. Your free choice. So notice here, Timothy Leary, this Luciferian libertarian, is promoting all this under the guise of individual rights. But that's a problem, because on what basis just speaking philosophically here, on what basis do we derive that as a right, quote unquote? How do we know that's a right? From whence do these rights come? Quote, nature? Well, nature shows all kinds of things, predators and prey. How do we know that it is, quote, a right to bomb your mind with LSD and psychedelics? In other words, just because you can do something doesn't mean that it's a right to do something. Boert then goes to talk about his speculations of that maybe, and I think he's wrong here, that maybe the government didn't actually begin the psychedelic revolution, but they tried to clamp it down and control it, and then they replaced it with heroin. I think that since Boert wrote his book, a lot of research has come out that vindicates the idea that it really was promoted intentionally. Boert had just said that Leary was promoting this intentionally, so unless he thinks Leary wasn't working at the behest of the government, I don't see how he could come to the conclusion that the government didn't begin the psychedelic revolution. It just doesn't make sense. But he is correct to point out that what the Vietnam War did was replace a lot of this phase of drug implementation into the population with a new drug, namely that from the Golden Triangle of Southeast Asia, heroin. Simultaneously, as the LSD dried up, large supplies of heroin suddenly became available. It was strong heroin imported from the Golden Triangle in Southeast Asia, largely under CIA control. Many young people who had their, quote, consciousness expanded with psychedelics ended up on heroin. And then he goes on to talk about a Dr. Louis Gottschalk in 1958 who had written on the possibility for the intelligence agencies to use addiction as a means of mass control. The report says, quote, "The addiction of a source to a drug which the interrogator could supply would foster the dependence of the source on the interrogator. Where the source was addicted previous to the situation, the interrogator might find already established a pattern of evasion laws and responsibilities with which the addict developed to meet his need for the drug in a society which proscribes its use. Then it goes on to say, according to the U.S. narcotics agents in Southeast Asia, the Bureau encountered a good deal of resistance from the CIA and the embassy when it first decided to open its office in Vietnam. Wonder why. The CIA contributed also, not just directly, but also indirectly to the heroin trafficking by training men who then became smugglers. In the 1974 Pulitzer Prize-winning study, The Heroin Trade, by the editors of Newsday, it was revealed that the U.S. Bureau of Narcotics and Dangerous Drugs in Miami cross-checked a list of men who landed at the Bay of Pigs. Yep, I had heard this. And at least 8% of the 1,500 Cuban-trained, quote, refugees were later investigated for drug trafficking. If it had not been for their CIA training, they would not have known how to move drugs. Interesting. Yeah. And then, of course, that's also why there's a mafia connection to the same subject matter. I will touch on that a little bit in my book, by the way, because that comes up in a book called The Dark Heart of Hollywood by Douglas Thompson, where he shows the family jewel files, declassified CIA documents about the connection between the CIA and mafia. And obviously that ties into drugs. So a new angle for those who are not familiar with that angle. Frank Olson, of course, that takes up a big section of Bowert's book, and Frank Olson is the guy who had unwittingly been dosed, but then it turns out that, and subsequently committed suicide, supposedly. Turns out that the Army announced in 1956 that since 1956 it had tested LSD on 1,500 unwitting servicemen. So when you join the military, you are a guinea pig. And on several thousand more volunteers, a total of 6,940 people. So there you go. All guinea pigs. Within days of the Army's admission of drug testing, the Department of Health, Education, and Welfare revealed that it had administered LSD to about 2,500 prisoners. So again, colleges, prisoners, Army chemical weapons tests on unwitting people. Then it goes on to describe, of course, some of the more traditional names, bluebird, artichoke, stuff that we talk about in my other talk on John Marx's book. But the reason that I bring in Walter Bowert's book is that we see yet another confirmation of this idea with a character like Tim Leary, that it's not just John C. Lilly, but many of these doctors, quote unquote, who were involved in this LSD MK Ultra operation were openly talking about being handlers. Okay, and that's what John C. Lilly's book is about. It's literally about programming the human computer. I mean, that's the name of the book. So if you hear people talking about MK Ultra, if it's being bounced around, and then the idea comes that, well, is there really any evidence to support that a handler can take somebody and dose them and so to speak program them, mind control them? Well, here's a book written by one of them. And on the topic of the character of Leary, you can look up YouTube talks where Leary is promoting Crowley, and he's sitting under a blasphemous Antichrist image. I'm not joking. That's in one of the interviews. And he's talking about how good Crowley is. Several years ago, I read, just on a whim, several chapters of a Timothy Leary book, just because I hadn't ever read Timothy Leary. Tibetan experiences of the dead, or something to that effect is the name of the book. It's been, several years, maybe even 10 years since I read that, but that shows you that Leary was an occultist, and at least took it somewhat seriously. And if anything, he took it seriously because he was learning just to be a handler, quote, shaman, right? Because the idea in a lot of these wackos is that since shaman could manipulate their devotees into thinking that they had god powers or whatever, and then shamanism could be a good path for a handler or a mind control operative or whatever. So that's why these kind of characters have an interest in shamanism and all this kind of stuff. But then what I'm saying is that we see the same thing then. You, again, start to notice patterns. What are these guys into? They're psychopaths that want to mind control people. They think that because they tripped acid, they now have this super duper insight into reality. And guess what? The insights that they have into reality are the same things that all the New Age people say. It's the same things that all the history of animism and shamanism have said for millennia. So the revelations and things that they discover are not new at all. They're just ancient pagan philosophy. Ancient Hindu philosophy. Now, early on in Lilly's book, he talks about trying to change people's perception of their body. Causing them to have out-of-body experiences, causing them to have near-death experiences, seeing if there would be a change in their psyche when they encountered demons or spirits or gods in their LSD states. And he posits the possibility that they could navigate new universes from 5 to 40 minutes in experiments based on the cognitional multi-dimensional space without the leaving the body meta program. So the subject sought beings other than himself, not human, in whom he existed and whom had control over him and other human beings. Thus the subject found whole new universes containing great varieties of beings, some greater than himself, some equal, and some lesser. Those greater than himself were a set which was so huge in space-time as to make the subject feel as a mere mote in their sunbeam. I mean, the subject felt that he was a single micro flash of energy in their time scale. I mean, what is he talking about? He felt he was in the absolute unconscious of these beings. He experienced many more sets, and I don't know if he means somebody he's mind controlling or if he's speaking of himself in third person, who knows. The beings were close to the subject in complexity time size. I mean, see, he makes up words, neologisms, and you're like, you don't know what he's talking about. There were dichotomies of evil beings and good beings. Evil ones were busy with purposes foreign to his own. They were almost unaware of his existence. The subject says that the good beings thought good thoughts towards him, through him, and to one another. They were at least conceivably human and humane. He interpreted them to be alien but friendly, but not so alien as to be removed from human beings in regard to their purposes and activities. Some of these beings are programming us in the long term, and they nurture us. They also experiment on us. So here's your alien DNA experiment, panspermia, the gods, right? History Channel, Ancient Aliens. He reports that discoveries such as atomic energy, LSD, and DNA are controlled by these entities. Here you go. Here's your Clockwork Elves. Here's your Terence McKenna. And yeah, I mean, this is common. There's nothing new here. This idea that, oh, I tripped and I saw the gods. Every shaman, Hindu, traditional, ancient pagan religion has said this from the beginning of the world. So I don't know how anybody could really believe that this is like revolutionary and new is beyond me. Then he goes on to talk about other basic beliefs of this person in this trip test. The subject believes in the existence of beings inside whom humans exist and who possess and control. So here we go with demonic possession. And yeah, I believe that's true. Isn't that interesting that all of these people want to talk about acid trips and how spiritual and real it is. Oh, but then when we start talking about the reality of demons and demonic possession, oh no, that's crazy. That doesn't exist. Even though these people in these acid trips come out saying the exact same thing. Oh, it's crazy. That's crazy. Again, it's very strange what he says. These beings that possess people are noisy. They're loud. Yeah, they're demons. He says they gradually try to incorporate more of themselves into the self. Yeah, that's called possession. He said that these beings are cognitional carnivores attempting to eat up his self and take control of him. Yeah, that's called demonic possession. I mean, how does anybody hear this and not think, hey, that sounds like what the Bible has said about demons for millennia? Now here we go with the stuff that's in Altered States, that stupid movie based on John C. Lilly with William Hurt. He felt like he had gone back into the beginning of his programming, and he was at a Big Bang spermatozoa primate carnivore fish stage. So stop and think about how preposterous this is. Number one, the individual here has not actually seen or known or proven that we actually come from some protozoa over millions of years. But now when this is discussed as a revelation from the acid trip, don't you know, oh yeah, that would be hailed as this great revelation, right? I saw it. I saw our beginning in the primordial soup when I was tripping balls. But that's preposterous, because the same people would accept that, but they're not going to accept the demon part, right? So in other words, the reason for this is that you're going to take into this drug experience the beliefs that you already have. So if you're already believing that we come from protozoa and shrimp or whatever, then that's how you're already going to interpret some thought or experience of that. It doesn't mean that it's true. Anyway, so that's what you get at the beginning of this book, is very strange descriptions of the experiences of people. Again, we don't know his test subjects, himself at times, we don't know, in the various stages and states. And he has all of this neologism, gobbledygook, he made up words that we don't know what he's talking about, that he's, again, probably just come up with while he was tripping. But he's very candid about, he basically assumes this radical mechanistic view of man and anthropology, which is not demonstrated empirically, oddly enough. It's actually a model, it's a pre-theoretical model to try to read the human being as just a biological computer. In other words, that's a presupposition, a model, a theory, a template by which you're interpreting the human person in anthropology. It's not something that's actually demonstrable. Now, are there analogies between the human mind and a computer? Sure. But it looks to me that John C. Lilly has gone beyond analogy. He doesn't just think this is, he thinks that it's literally the same, because that's why early on in the book he talks about the ability to create an AI eventually down the road, because it's just another version of a human biocomputer. Humans are just computers, so you can recreate it and create AI, and it's no different than a human, right? Because it's all just computers under different forms. But is it all just computers under different forms? No, it's not. I mean, that's the thing that we don't ever really get an explanation for, and I think that's what he's talking about by the meta program, the meta self. I think he's talking about the self, the subject there, the person. I think that's what he's talking about. But I mean, this is so jumbled and confusing that who knows exactly what he's talking about. He sees this as a kind of inner journey, right? So physics just, searches out and discovers the external world. Astrophysics tries to search out, the celestial heavens and so forth. And he sees himself as a psychonaut, right? Like an astronaut plumbing the depths of the inner world and the psyche. And that's kind of the final frontier. I think Carl Jung said something to that same effect to Wolfgang Pauli once. And it just goes on and on. It's such a rambling book. Very, very difficult to read. Like, for example, a given human computer is limited in its operations by its own acquired mathematical conceptual machinery. Okay, I can buy that. This is part of its supra-self meta-programming. Okay, maybe I could get that. Maximum control over the meta-programmic level by the self-program is achieved not by one-to-one orders or instructions from one level to the other. The control is based upon exploration of n-dimensional spaces, finding key points for transformations. First, in decisive small local regions, which can result in large-scale transformations. This model reminds one of Ashby's design of a brain, in which the homeostat stimulated in one small region makes adjustments throughout the rest of the region. I mean, what? So I think he's trying to make a speculationary leap in terms of the idea of the brain versus the mind. So, in other words, how does gray matter in our noggins interact with or match up to these very complex DNA mathematical programs that appear to work and affect our physiognomy and our, the way we live and our body and all this stuff. But this is all just so I mean, the key is that there is no key. The computer within itself ideally recognizes that there's no locks, no forbidden transitions, no areas in which data cannot be freely moved from one zone to another. At the boundaries of the computer, there are categorical imperatives. Now see, he's bringing in Kant. Now the problem becomes not the boundaries within the computer, but the boundaries outside the computer. By outside, I do not mean only the intergumentary boundaries of the body. I mean the other sources of influence of man through the bottom layer of the external chemical physical reality. To symbolize this doubt about the boundaries of the computer, a line is placed above the super self meta programs known and labeled as unknown. I mean, I don't know. And then the next chapter he starts talking about migraines. Yeah, I mean, so this is basically what you've got for, 100 pages here. And half of the time it literally sounds like a madman just rambling, and you have no idea what he's talking about. So he tries to lay out levels of the scheme or the programming. So let's look at his levels here. At the bottom level, he's got the biochemical physical level. Okay, I could see that. Part of that biochemical body is the sensory motor controls and the vascular body. Okay. The biochemical aspects of the brain, the gray matter, vascular brain. Okay. Then the next level is what he calls these programs. This is just, the body operating as it operates. Subroutines, storage, programs, program storage, metaprograms, metaprogram storage, self-metaprogram. What is that? Awareness. Supra-self-metaprograms. What is that? It means to be metaprogrammed. Supra-species metaprograms. So this is humans in general. So it sounds kind of like if you listen to the Arthur Kessler talk on Ghost in the Machine, that's what he's talking about, right? The meta program, the meta self is what is the ghost in the machine. And if you remember, he talked about holons, which are these layers and levels of complexity that build up the human being. And the human being doesn't just operate, on the basis of genetic programming from what's universal, but he also has aspects that are individual, right? Like his personality. And that's kind of, I think, what we're talking about here. And I get the impression that what Lilly thinks he can do is that he can tap into any one of those levels of the structure or makeup of a human being, and then alter and control not only the self-perception but also the external world perception of that being. In other words, he's, as a handler, he can control how that test subject, after going through the mind control, not only views himself but the external world, is, I think, largely what we're talking about here. And again, many of the other mind control operatives are cited in the book, which again shows that we're talking about an MK Ultra guy here. For example, with vigorous current and interlocking, the human biocomputer is busy with information exchanges at all levels. Yes, that's true. This is written about by Gregory Bateson. The model projects expectations and predictions continuously as the interlocking develops, such as the eye. The real inputs are compared with the outputs in all models. So you see that he's relying here on Gregory Bateson, one of the other MK Ultra doctors. Then he goes into layers and levels of programs, as we mentioned before. individuals and the species are two different layers, very similar to what Kessler said. But what I did want to talk about that I mentioned in the first part of the talk was trauma and trauma-based mind control, and that Lilly specifically says that you can induce this. So here's an actual, MK Ultra doctor talking about this. And why has this person not been investigated for abuse? I don't understand how why are these people getting away with this? There's, discussion of isolation tanks and all that kind of stuff. This is the summary section where he says, it's not long, so I'm just going to read it so you can see exactly what he says. Some general ideas from extrapolation and reworking of the modern general purpose computer theory are used to explain and control aspects of the human brain. Duh. I mean, I would say you've gone beyond theory, that you've actually accepted this as a total explanation. In addition, for the human brain, to the theory of the general purpose computers is the concept of the self-meta program, or the internal programmer present in the 10 to the 10th degree neurons assembly known as the brain. What? The self-meta programs operate between the storage and the external reality. The self-programming properties, in addition to the stored program properties, are essential to understanding mental operations resulting in external general purpose behaviors such as speech and language. Stored programs and meta-programs are characteristic of the human. The self-organizing aspects of the computer programming and programs are now conceptually reasonable and realizable in modern non-biological computers. The human brain, a super biocomputer, is a parallel processor and is a realizable artificial machine, but this structure has not yet been built. So in other words, he says we can use the human mind as a model to create an AI machine, but it's not been built yet. The actions of certain substances on the brain, the drugs, are explicable by this theory. The examination of stored programs and reprogramming are opened up by LSD, possibly by the introduction of small amounts of randomness and noise. In children, automatic meta-program implantation or externally forced meta-programming, that is trauma-based mind control, persisting as meta-programs below the levels of awareness in the adult can be controlling for the later adult programs. So in other words, what I take him to be saying is that in the child, LSD given to the child and programmed as a child can be a controlling factor when they become an adult. And it can influence adult thinking and behavior, he says. Energy can be taken from some of these automatic meta programs and transferred into self-meta program with the specific techniques and special central states chemically evoked. So in other words, he's saying the handler can program and take energy from what would be your sort of biological DNA programming, and that can be harnessed for the mind control programming. I think that's what he's saying. Some of these are things like, some of these are the ones that are, he's talking about, I think, the ones that can be harnessed. Programs essential to biological survival, nature, nurture. Examples of this method of investigation and of results of self-analysis and self-programming are given. So, wow. I mean, if somebody has this book, this is page 126 and 127. If I'm misunderstanding this, please correct me, because it's very difficult to understand what the heck this guy's talking about. But that does appear to be what he's saying. He does appear to be saying that you give LSD to kids and you can mind wipe them and you can harness their childlike energy to become an alter personality as an adult that controls them based on what was done as a child. What in the world? How in the hell did we get here? Unbelievable. I can't believe this. I mean, I can believe there are wicked people that would do this, but how is there a public book about this? Why has this guy not been denounced? Why is he not shamed? I mean, this is unbelievable. And I bought this book because I didn't believe it. I was like, I heard this mentioned, and I thought, no, that can't be. Surely not. And then you get 20 pages in, and he's talking about sticking mirrors in front of people tripping, and that it will blow their mind, and they'll see themselves melt, and you can tear down taboos, and it's like, you know, you can control how they see or don't see other people's faces, and I'm just like, this is insane. This guy is nuts. And then he's talking about gods and demons and possession, and you're like, no, wait a minute. I thought this was a scientist. He's talking about using movies to mind control people. At least that's what I understand him to be. That's what he seems to say. Flashing, how does he put it? Projectors and images and screens. Literally slow flickering movies. Page 21. To people strapped down, mind control, put in sensory deprivation tanks. Could you imagine being stuck in a sensory deprivation tank, floating around, being tripped out of your mind by this psycho, and him making you watch some no telling what movie he's making you watch. I'm sure it's not wholesome, whatever it is. Probably making you watch Altered States, which is a shitty movie. Oh man. So yeah, where are the detractors now? Where are all the haters? Where are all the, oh, this is all crazy, there's no such thing, you can't mind control children, that doesn't happen, they wouldn't do that. This book's promoted by Psychology Today. And the book says what a great man he is, of course. Best known for his dolphin research. Well, the Guardian article that I cited in my article says they were basically engaging in bestiality with dolphins. I mean, these people are nuts. Why are we being ruled and led around by complete nutcases? I mean, these people are straight up evil. He's writing a book saying his test subjects are possessed. He probably means, so I don't know who he means, who this test subject is. Basic beliefs, right? Talking about demons on pages 44 and 45. Promoting panspermia on page 45. Oh my gosh. So anyway, now, you know, having had more than one acid trip when I was younger, and at least one of those being bad, you know, I again can speak from experience here. It's not totally from the outside. You know, these drugs are very, very dangerous. They're very harmful. If there are any good effects to these kinds of things, I'm skeptical of that. I mean, people email me and message me every time I talk about this stuff, and they try to convince me that there might be some pharmaceutical use. Maybe somewhere, but I've not seen it. I don't see how or when or in what way any of this could help anybody. And who are all the characters promoting it? Nobody good. Why is nobody good promoting this? Okay, think about that. Nobody good. Not a single good person promotes this stuff. Every one of them are these characters like Ken Kesey, right? Involved in the Human Ecology Fund, which is a CIA front to promote LSD. Tim Leary, a Crowleyan guy who thinks he's God, right? John C. Lilly, who's torturing kids. Ewan Cameron, torturing people. Captain Alfred Hubbard giving LSD out to all these people and turning Hollywood onto it, right? Total evil guy. Tavistock Institute guy. There's no way that guy's good. Ain't nobody from the damn Tavistock Institute good. Who else? Henry Luce, Time Magazine, promoting their Skull and Bones. They're not good. They don't care about you. They're not giving you LSD to awaken you. Colonel Tom Parker, Elvis's handler. That guy was dosing Elvis with drugs every damn day. That guy's not good. What makes you think he's good? None of these military freaks and psychopaths are not good. I mean, who are military guys? Generals, right? Trained killers. Now, am I saying it's always wrong to be in the military? No, I do think there's such a thing as patriotism. I do not believe that America's wars have been truly patriotic. I'm not saying that the people who fought in them didn't have good motives. I'm saying that, as General Smedley Butler said, war is a racket. Essentially, modern warfare has been fought for bankers. You're all tricked into thinking that it's patriotism. And yes, you might have fought some bad people. But that doesn't mean that the people who run your system that you're really fighting for are good people. And again, all of these people who are giving out all this LSD, none of them are good guys. There's not one single good guy. Sidney Gottlieb, that guy's not good. Jose Delgado, that freak writes books on mind control. Controlling you. None of these guys are good. How are any of you people thinking that this stuff is good? It doesn't matter that you had several trips and none of them were bad. That doesn't mean that this is a good thing. It doesn't. I mean, I'm sure there's people who potentially have done heroin and maybe they weren't immediately addicted. Does that mean heroin's a good thing? No, not necessarily. No. So in the same way, it boggles my mind. And look, everybody who engages in this stuff for a long time, I don't think they come out on the other side enlightened and spiritual, philosophical visionaries. I don't think Terence McKenna is a visionary. If you read about shamans and fakirs and the people that have been doing this for millennia, many of them end up insane. Many of them end up with epilepsy. So if I'm looking at Mircea Eliade's classic book on shamanism, Archaic Techniques of Ecstasy, with the foreword by Wendy Doniger, and I believe Wendy Doniger was connected to Carlos Castaneda, and Carlos Castaneda was working at the behest of the establishment to study all this same stuff. Shamans have a direct connect to mind control. This is admitted by Eliade on page 38 and 39. The interaction with demonic spirits is mentioned on 36 and 37 as a universal trait of shamanism. Many shamans develop epilepsy as a result. Page 29. Does this sound good to you? Does this sound helpful? Many shamans believe that afterwards they are possessed. Page 18. Does that sound good? Is that the kind of life you want? Pretty common that they feel like they are possessed as a result by demons. Page 6. Right away, he says that most shamans feel they're possessed by... Come on, man. There's a connection to ritual abuse. Page 41. Every shamanic experience seems to have the same patterns of the fragmentation of the psyche. This is universal. There's a demonic dismemberment of the body. Yes, that's what he says. Demonic beings, page 42, 43. This is universal in the shamanic experience. Ritual meals and cannibalism by the demons. And then as a result, after this, a demonic spirit guide follows the shaman, page 44. So, look how stupid this is. You are being duped by demons. This guy's not a Christian. Mircea Eliade is just a famous comparative religion scholar. He's looking at initiation rites across all religions in terms of shamanism and ancient civilizations. And what happens? Symbolic burial in the temple or the fetish house, symbolic descent to the underworld, a hypnotic sleep, usually made by drinks and drugs, beatings, burning, torture, and fire, amputations, cruelties. And then the shaman comes out. This is so what's happening is, I'll tell you what's happening is that you are having an out-of-body experience. You are being tortured by demons. What did we just read John C. Lilly saying his test subjects? Oh, I was tortured by demons. But this is a great experience. These are not legitimate spiritual experiences. They're real spiritual experiences. I'll give you that. They're real. But just because something is real doesn't mean that it's good. You can have a real bad spiritual experience. Why does Allen Ginsberg say the exact same thing as I read last time in LSD and the American Dream, Storming Heaven? What did Allen Ginsberg say? Well, I did peyote, and I saw the god Molech, and I realized that America was sacrificing to Molech. Why is it that everyone sees and experiences something basically demonic? Why is it that everyone who does these drugs comes to the conclusion of pantheism, and they think that when they say pantheism that they've come up with some fantastic new revelation when there's absolutely nothing new about it? We're all one, man. There's nothing new to that. That's the ancient Hinduism says that, right? So, but now, so in other words, what I'm getting at is that as the Orthodox saints, for example, point out many times, one of the best ways to test whether a spiritual experience is legitimate, as in from God, or whether it's from deceiving spirits, is whether the result of the experience produces a person who's more humble or one who's more arrogant. Now, in the case of the acid trip that I had back when I was young, I was extremely arrogant after this. I believed that I had solved the world and all this nonsense, which I didn't know anything. And almost everyone I know who does this stuff and engages in it regularly is extremely arrogant, and they think that they know everything. And the funny part about that is that they bounce around from one philosophy to the next every few weeks. Like they don't even believe what was the great revelation, 2 weeks later. So that, again, that's proof that that's not a legitimate philosophical spiritual experience. If it was, you wouldn't be shifting with the sands and the ocean tides, with every new philosophy that comes your way. So none of this is good. And, peace doesn't come through some kind of shortcut. Spiritual peace, enlightenment, truth, those things don't come by some easy, quick path of popping some pill or some kind of drug or something. There's no way to find peace and happiness without learning the law of God, without learning what's in Scripture, without learning about Christ, without learning what's in the Gospels, right? That's the only way. And why do I say that? Because all of the other ways are all they're going to try to tell you is to look at yourself and worship yourself. That's what all other religions do. They tell you to worship yourself. But as a finite being, as a created being, you can worship yourself on and on and on and on every day, all the time, and it doesn't make you happy. Why? Because you weren't made to worship yourself. One finite thing can't satisfy another finite thing. And worshiping yourself is essentially what Satan tempted man with in the garden. He said, don't listen to God. God doesn't like you. Do it your own way and you can become God. Right? Will worship, self-worship, believing that you are God is the root of all pride, arrogance, the fall, etc., rebellion. And that's essentially what you get distilled in essence in the LSD experience or many of these other psychedelics. Again, maybe there's some weird one case out there of somebody that this had a good effect on. I don't know. But it doesn't matter because of 99.9% of the cases result in people who think that they are God and that they're shamans and that they've discovered that they're one with all reality. They're just regurgitating pantheism. But that's automatic, bad experience. Automatic, straight nonsense. Automatic that you were not communing with God in your experience. I can tell you that for sure. And that's why the Bible, in many times, many places, forbids sorcery, pharmakeia, right? That's not to say you can never utilize drugs or means in a positive, healthy way. Ecclesiasticus says that you can. But sorcery is the specific use of concoctions, potions, drugs, etc., to engage in spiritual progress, to do something spiritual, to speak to spiritual beings, to commune with spirits and gods and so forth. That is the practice that's forbidden. And no, you can't just trip acid and say, well, I'm not going to commune with spiritual beings. I just want to focus on myself, man. No, you don't need it. Why are you focusing on yourself? You're not God. Your egoism, your attachment to yourself, excessive self-love and self-worship is your problem. That is why you're unhappy. And these negative, dark spiritual forces are the ones that promote worshiping yourself, loving yourself, obsessing over yourself, narcissism. And guess what? Why do they promote that? Because it's self-destructive. That's why. Because you end up destroying yourself going down that path. All the people who go down that path thinking that they're going to gain power, they're going to get some occult power or whatever, they're going to come out of this with a spirit guide like Timothy Leary says, and like the shamans think, and they end up messed up for years and possibly even messed up forever. So why would you play Russian roulette with your psyche, with your soul? It's foolish. It's preposterous. The mistakes I made when I was young were foolish and preposterous. I would never do those things again. And a lot of people think that, you know, when I talk about this, oh, you're just trying to keep people from you know, some sort of enlightenment. No, I'm not. I'm telling you from experience what a bad experience is and what a good experience is. So, look, you have before you life and death, as Scripture says, right? Like, so you could have a night where you're going to sit and read the Psalms or read the Proverbs, or you have another night where you're going to go out and meet up with some buds and, you know, trip acid. Right? So which of these is going to give you a better experience, do you think? You could go experience the mystical vision of God in the Orthodox liturgy, or you can go trip acid with your friends and commune with the demons. It's that simple. It really is. One's demonic, one's angelic. How do we know that? Well, what do all the people who focus on the psychedelics say? Worship yourself. Oh, I'm an atheist. Oh, I'm a Hindu. I'm a pantheist. They regurgitate millennia old heresies and false religions that are nothing but gobbledygook. So, in other words, the path of doublethink or the path of integration, holism, health, spiritual fulfillment, right? Psalm 2, meditate in the law of God day and night. Anyway, so that's my recommendations on that. And no, it wasn't intended to be a sermon, but I can speak on the things that I've experienced. And many, many, many people do ask me constantly about LSD and drug. Why do I have a negative view of psychedelics? Look, all these people that are promoting it, they're not promoting it because they like you and care about you and want you to do well. A lot of the people in the alt media that promote psychedelics, they're doing it because it gets a lot of hits and it's popular. And I'm telling you, every one of the books, mainline books on the history of this stuff, tells you that it's right out of the pharmaceutical, military industrial complex, CIA. They have nothing positive to give you, ever. They're never going to do anything good for you because those entities, those institutions, were founded and created with an anti-human agenda. All of them. CIA, Rockefellers, right? Begins with an anti-human agenda, a Malthusian agenda. Skull and Bones, Time Life magazine, promotion of all this stuff. They don't care about you. Why does Time magazine promote anti-humanism? Constantly. Still, every day today. To this day, all the issues of Time magazine that come out promote transhumanism, abortion, trannies, transgender, destroying your kids with tranny stuff. Do you think that all that's bad? Oh, but they do want to give you one good thing, which is LSD. No, come on, man, grow up. Your life will be immensely improved when you begin to exercise humility. And the first step of humility is to say, I am not God. I don't know everything. I am not an Ubermensch. So anyway, this is not a super long episode this week because the John C. Lilly book itself is not that long, and it's just almost unreadable. If you really want to, you can get that book and you can try to make your way through it. If you do make your way through, I mean, look, I'm a guy who made myself go through Tragedy and Hope, right? 1,300 pages, and I can't make it through John C. Lilly's entire 200-page book. So, if you can, I will commend you. I will send you a picture of my favorite brony if you can make it through that whole book. Anyway, so you've been listening to Jay's Analysis. Next week we will do the next Globalist Books series book. But I do think that this John C. Lilly book was crucial because it is a clear, definite example of an MK Ultra handler saying that he can wipe even children's brains with LSD through all kinds of abuse. So, skeptics, what do you say to that? Maybe we will do Karl Popper next week, The Open Society. That's definitely a globalist book. Maybe Jacques Attali. Maybe another Jonas Salk. I haven't really decided yet. We'll have to see. But thank you for listening this week. And stay tuned. The new book will be out soon. I think it's about a third done. But I'm making good progress. So should be good. Hopefully it will be a step up my game from Esoteric Hollywood 1. Hopefully part 2 will again be better written, better sources, better citations, better meat this time around. I think it's going to be good. Basically, the structure, for those that are interested, is going to be like this. This first section, we're going to do Hollywood cults, mobs, and spies, and terrorists. The terrorists. The next section, it kind of goes from normal to crazy to crazy to crazier, right? So the next section then goes to mind control. That'll be pretty beefed up, a lot of stuff that we haven't covered before. Then after mind control, it goes even crazier, step up the crazy, to weather control. Yes, weather control. Hollywood has actually dealt with this several times in a very fascinating way. And we will also see, pretty solid documentation on weather control, manipulation, geoengineering. And then we get into level 4 crazy in the last section of the book, which will be Hollywood transhumanism. So that's the structure of the book. A lot of interesting stuff, new stuff. So look for that in maybe summer, I'm guessing. Probably. May, June, somewhere in there probably. Anyway, if you do want to do more reading this week, and you're not interested in John C. Lilly's book, I would say read Operation Mind Control by Walter Boert, because the more I research this topic, more time goes by, the more I start to see that, a lot of this stuff is pretty solid. That's a readable book, similar to John Marx's book. And you can also read John Potash's book, Drugs as Weapons Against Us. I don't agree with every chapter in that book on all the deaths of all these celebrities. Potash has a very left perspective, but that's okay. I have no problem reading people I disagree with. There's a lot of good information in that book that is true, new stuff I had not learned. So if you want to read that book, that's a good one to get too. If you want to go for John C. Lilly, good luck. Put on your trooper hat and buckle down, because it's probably the worst book I've ever read. Thank you.